Hi. In this lecture I will talk about fiction, and in another lecture I will also talk about non-fiction. And even if I split up it like that, in fiction and non-fiction, I really want to emphasize that two things. One thing is that what you can say about fiction is very much true about non-fiction also. Like, for example, this saying, show, don't tell, or that you have to have a conflict. That is true both for fiction and non-fiction. And the other thing is that the line between fiction and non-fiction is very diffuse. And I will get back to that when I talk about non-fiction. But this lecture about fiction will deal mostly with the conventional way of telling a story in movies and the typical Western way of telling a story. And there are other ways, of course, but in this lecture I'll focus on the typical Aristoteles way of telling a story. And many of these ideas are very old, and Aristoteles wrote about them more than 2,000 years ago in his Poetics. But one saying that is a little bit more contemporary is this one, show, don't tell. What you mean is that movies are primarily a visual media. So you should try to tell as much as possible visually and not have the actors speak dialogue in order to convey information. Or you should avoid text and so on, for example in a documentary. You should try to tell as much as possible in the visuals. And some movies are very great at this, especially feature films, especially drama, especially Hollywood, I would say. And especially movie makers like Steven Spielberg. He is very skilled at actually telling a story with the visual. And when I say visual, there is lots of components in that. Camera position, camera framing, and where actors are standing, where they are looking, their in relationship to each other in the space, and so on. And the look and feel of environment and so on. But even if most movie makers would agree on this saying that you should show, don't tell, it is surprising how often some movie making are stepping aside from this idea. And I'm thinking mostly about non-fiction and about documentaries, and maybe specifically about science shows, documentaries about science. If you think of a typical science show, it is very, very narrative driven. You have a written script that someone is reading or speaking into the camera, and then you have illustrations of this. You add images to this. And this is very, very common. BBC, Utbildningsradion in Sweden and so on, they all work in this way, that first they have a script with a narrative and then they add images. And of course I'm doing the same here. I'm just talking. So this recorded lecture here, that is not really show, don't tell, because you could turn off the image and you still would have my voice, which is the primary carrier of information. while the visual is just adding interest, you could say. And what I say is not really audio. Of course it is audio, but if you think of the information that is portrayed, that is not audio, it is written text. Because what I say, you could write it down, and then it will be a text. So my dialogue here, my narrative, is text-based, while things like this is audio. Traditionally, you split up movie making in pre-principal and post. Pre-production, that is when you basically prepare for the shooting. You cast the actors, you make location scouting, finding locations, you do production design, you decide on how the sets and props should look, and so on. Then you have principal or the shooting, where you actually shoot. And then you have the post-production, where you edit and you do the score, the music, you add visual effects and so on. But you actually have a fourth phase before the pre-production, and that is of course the script writing. And that is often forgotten actually. So you can say that you have 4 steps in the production, the design of a movie, because you can see movie making as a design process. And in that case we have 4 distinct parts or phases of the design process. Because of course in the script very much of the design is decided on locations, conflict, character, attributes and so on. While in pre-production you for example decide on the exact location, and in principle the actors do their acting and so on. So all this is design processes, and you could say that the movie is made at least 4 times, and it is remade, because a script is a kind of plan or blueprint for the movie. So a script is in some way the first design iteration of the movie, and then you have more and more versions of the movie. You have 4 times a story.